それでは、コブラコード様、よろしくお願いいたします。
皆さん、こんにちは。私は Cobra Code というものとして活動しているゲームクリエイターです。本日は Unreal で 2D と 2.5D ゲームを4年間作って学んだことについて発表させていただきます。このプレゼンテーションはアジェンダと自己紹介までは日本語で話し、その後は英語でお話しします。日本語の字幕がつきますのでご了承ください。どうぞよろしくお願いします。アジェンダはそもそも優位で 2D ゲームを作ることが可能なのでしょうか？できたとしても優位で 2D ゲームを作るのは何のメリットがあるでしょうか？ PaperZD と PaperZD は何でしょうか？ 2D と 2.5D のワークフローと実例、そして優位 2D の裏技。その前は軽い自己紹介をします。今の時点で5年間以上ほとんど毎日 Unreal Engine を使っています。それで4年前ぐらい Cobra Code という YouTube チャンネルを開いて Unreal のチュートリアルと開発ログを提供し始めました。最初は 3D ゲームの開発動画を提供したけれど、かなり早めに 2D と 2.5D を特化しました。Unreal Engine を特化する前に一般のプログラマーとして働いてまして、ウェブサイト、サーバー側アプリケーション、ブラウザゲームなど幅広く活動しましたので、Unreal Engine を勉強する前にしっかりプログラミングの基礎がありました。以上が簡単な自己紹介になります。それではここから英語で本題に入らせていただきます。Okay, so I'm now going to continue in English. And the first thing we got to talk about is it even possible to make 2D games in Unreal? And you probably already know the answer is yes, or otherwise, this would be a very short presentation. But to be exact, the answer is well, kind of. Because the way we make 2D games is, of course, very different from the way it used to work on retro consoles. So, a 2D sprite is basically just a material or a texture that is attached to a quad or a plane, which can then be placed in 3D space. So, all the gameplay interactions happen in 3D space, while the game looks or appears to be a 2D game. And if it looks like a 2D game or not simply depends on how we place the camera, the settings on the camera, and we can use the perspective camera. This actually gives us a natural parallax scrolling if we put background elements at different distances. But we can also use the orthographic camera, which removes depth from the scene, and that is actually the one that I'm using here. And yeah, it makes it look even more like a pure 2D game, but if you want to have parallax scrolling, you have to manually implement it in the materials. Now, this is not just the case for Unreal Engine, but it's also the case for Unity, Godot, and any other modern engine that you would use. And while we're at it, let's also define the term 2D and 2.5D for the sake of this presentation. So on the left side, again, we have something similar to what we just did right now. So there are sprites at different distances, at different places in the world. So it appears to be a 2D game, even though technically everything is running like a 3D game. And here I'm also using the orthographic camera and actually had to set up the materials so that the different background layers shift as the character walks around. On the right side, we have a sprite-based character, and also the sword that we're throwing is sprite-based, but the backgrounds, the environment is 3D meshes, static meshes, right? So we're mixing 2D sprites with 3D elements to create a game. And this is what I would like to refer to 2.5D for the sake of this presentation, while the official documentation actually calls this a 2D 3D hybrid. So I'm actually going to use both of those terms. 2.5D is very ambiguous. It could mean many other things as well. So we could have a 2.5D game where the characters are actually skeletal 3D meshes, but the gameplay is only locked to the X and Y axis. But again, for the sake of this presentation, I want to call 2.5D these kind of games where we are using 2D sprites for the characters and 3D environments in the background. And let's look back at 2021 when I first tried out Paper 2D because things were very different back then. There was very little information about it available. There was, of course, the official documentation. There was a couple of videos, and there was a template. But most people just hated on it, and it was very misunderstood because nobody really showed what can be done with it, or very few people showed. We're actually going to get into that. But yeah, so people were saying it is bad. You should never use it. It is horrible. But I didn't want to believe them. I didn't want to give up. I wanted to actually try it out for myself and see what I think of it. And that's when I dove more into the official template. So the 2D side-scroller template came with Unreal Engine 4, and it just came pre-packaged for everybody that installed the engine, right? Like we have the third-person template, the first-person template, and sadly, it was discontinued with Unreal Engine 5, like many other templates. But we can actually make templates ourselves, and I made a open source 2D template as well, which I'm going to talk about later. But yeah, so there are ways to get different templates like this back into the engine, even with Unreal Engine 5. And there was also a couple of official tutorials on the official Unreal Engine YouTube channel that taught how to use Paper 2D. So this one is the Paper 2D. Let me bring up the laser pointer. This one is the introduction to Paper 2D. I think this was actually the first tutorial series. There was another one, which is a Blueprint 2D side-scroller, more like a retro kind of action platformer type of game. There was another one, which was a top-down C++ tanks versus zombies. And there actually was a sample project called Tappy Chicken, which was created by an artist at Epic Games using blueprints. And yeah, it was kind of a Flappy Bird clone, but it showcased mobile features, it showcased Paper 2D. And yeah, so those were the sources that were available back in 2021. But all of them were kind of old. Most of them were released in 2014, 2016, and it seemed a little bit abandoned. So I just started trying things out by myself, and I used the template to get started. I found this cool character, the warrior by Clembot on itch.io, started using that, just changed the color palette a little bit. And yeah, so I put it into the map, I changed the sprites, the flipbooks that are being used in the blueprint, and then also added the lights and shadows to the scene and made sure that the sprite is casting shadows. So you just have to tick a box and the sprite starts casting shadows. You gotta change from an unlit material to a lit material for the material to be able to receive lights, to receive shadows. And yeah, so I just played around with that, but I still didn't really know what to do with it, and went back into doing more research. And that's when I came across two amazing Unreal Fest Europe presentations. Actually, both of these are from Unreal Fest Europe 2019. So that was a little bit more up to date than the information I found in the official sources. Well, I guess it's on the official Unreal Engine channel, so we can call this an official source as well, I guess. And the first presentation I looked at was from Chris Wilson, the design director at Cardboard Sword. And at the time, they were working on a stealth Metroidvania, a 2D stealth Metroidvania that was fully built with sprites and tile maps, no 3D elements, I believe. And it's called The Siege and the Sandbox. And yeah, so the talk was very interesting because he gave a lot of insight on pixel art techniques they use to make the game look good in Unreal Engine, make the pixel art look good in Unreal Engine, their entire tile map workflow, normal maps. They tried to use auto-generated normal maps. It didn't look that great with the lighting. They actually went with hand-painted normal maps, which is a lot of work, but looks amazing. And yeah, also just generally struggles of being early adopters of Paper 2D because it was still being developed alongside while they were already working on the game. And yeah, one of the struggles they had was with the orthographic camera, because they had quite a large stage. They were using light sources, and it just didn't really work with the orthographic camera at the time. Since then, actually, the orthographic camera got many updates. I think Unreal 5.3, 5.4, quite recently. Um, Not just for us Paper 2D users, but actually for everybody. They updated the orthographic camera. It works a lot better now, but that is also great for us 2D lovers. Anyway, so yeah, he talked about how they then went on to use the perspective camera, gave them the natural parallax scrolling, and that actually worked out quite nicely for them. All in all, that gave me a lot of insight into the 2D toolset, possible issues, and also techniques that could be used. And I then found another amazing presentation about a game called Octopath Traveler, which I think most of you are familiar with. But for those two people that might be listening that don't know about it, it's a classic JRPG, but with the twist of using classic retro pixel art together with Unreal Engine's advanced lighting and post processing to mix nostalgia with novelty. And this is an art style they dubbed HD2D. The second half of the speech goes into game design and story elements, but what I was mostly interested in was the first half, which was by the art director Mika Izuka-san, and she explains a lot about their prototyping process, how they reached this final look through a lot of trial and error, and also she goes into very minute detail about different settings they used on the post-process volume, also different project settings. And yeah, it is all in all an amazing talk that really inspired me, and I still go back to it every once in a while to kind of refresh my memory. And both of these presentations really gave me a lot of hope because they showed what can be done. And Octopath was already released at the time, so it was proof that it can be done, while the Siege and the Sandbox was still in development. But yeah, then I went back to Unreal Engine and my own project that I made from the template and added a couple of stuff. So I bought this nice map from the marketplace. I added some lights, I added some enemies, some hitboxes on the sword, and it kind of started turning into a beat 'em up, like an old school beat 'em up with just chain attacks, special moves that you can do. And yeah, so this project, I had no intention of actually like releasing it as a full game, but just for myself to learn many things, to just have fun with it. And it kind of became the vehicle for me to learn more things about Paper 2D, learn about the limitations, and also just learn about everything that can be done. So I then made a devlog series starting from this. And yeah, the first video, I put it out there. It got a lot of great reception. I think even now it sits at over like 200,000 views. And yeah, it really gave me direction into finding this niche that not many people are working with, that not many people are doing. And yeah, so I then got a lot of ideas for tutorials and started to double down on Paper 2D. And that is still the main thing I do nowadays. And yeah, I made a lot of other projects. Let me just click here to start them up over the years. And this is just a couple of them. There's, of course, many more. But yeah, let me just walk you through it a little bit. Pointer, there we go. Yeah, so let's start with the 2D platformer, right? So on first glance, you could not tell that this is an Unreal Engine game. And yeah, so it is just a classic platformer. We got these kind of platforms you can jump through from the bottom, but you don't fall through from the top, which you have in a lot of games. We can jump on the heads of enemies. And we also have these springs that launch you up. Right in the background, the stage, it's all made with Unreal Engine's tile map system. The characters are driven by Paper 2D flipbooks. And yeah, then I took things a step further with this action platformer. So it kind of builds upon the things that I learned in this platform on the left, but we also have projectiles now, so we can shoot. And these are using a flipbook as well, right? So there's a flipbook inside of a blueprint. Then we use a sphere collision, and then on top of that, use the projectile movement component, right? Because the gameplay implementation itself is very similar to a 3D game. It's just that we have to put a constraint on the axes, right? So there's an axis constraint that the character, that the bullet, they cannot go into the background, they cannot come into the foreground. And something I then started experimenting with was top-down games. And oh, there's the pointer. Yeah, you can see here. And yeah, so this is just a small dungeon stage. You can see the character has 8 directions, so 8 directional animations. The enemies just have 4 directions. And yeah, so there's a sword strike. Again, it has a hitbox that gets turned on, and it pushes back the enemies that get hit by it. There's also a bow and arrow mechanic, again, using the projectile movement component. And again, like you could not tell that any of these games are made with Unreal Engine because they are just typical 2D games from the perspective of the camera. And yeah, something I've been working on recently on the right, bottom right, is a 2.5D JRPG, a turn-based JRPG with turn-based combat. And yeah, all of these characters, they are all flipbooks that are animating. Actually, the characters on the left side only use base paper 2D, and the characters on the right side, because they're more complex, use PaperZD. And you will hear the term PaperZD a lot. I will later explain exactly what it is, but it is a nice tool that helps us make the development a lot easier for more complex characters. And yeah, you can see they work together with the Niagara particle systems here as well. And yeah, so that's just a couple of the things that I've been working on over the years. But I also wanted to see what other developers were doing. I already said that I looked at Octopath Traveler and I looked at the Siege and the Sandfox. And at the time, I thought those were the only games that used Paper 2D or that were 2D, 3D hybrids made with Unreal Engine. And well, once I started looking around, it turned out there's actually many, many more. There's actually hundreds out there. And yeah, so one of my viewers told me, hey, Ender Lilies was made with Unreal Engine, which I didn't even know. And yeah, so it's a 2D Metroidvania. It uses bone-based animations actually powered by Spine. So I think it actually does not use the underlying Paper 2D system. It has its own material system powered by Spine. But yeah, it is a 2D game made with Unreal Engine, and the sequel, Ender Magnolia, the same story. And right, so there's a lot of games like this. Twilight Monk released recently. It's also a Metroidvania made by a small team. Um, and yeah, so there's a lot of different genres here. We can see Tarot Oakard is a 2D horror game made by a solo developer. On the right side, we got Spaceman Memories, an RPG, also being made by a solo developer. Storm Settlers is a 2D top-down strategy game, also being made by a sole developer. Rocky Malati is also a YouTuber. And yeah, so I just kind of keep tabs on all these games and try to find out as much as possible about them. Snacko is a city builder, or let's say a cozy life sim by a husband and wife team, right? So there's many different genres here. We got Northwind, which just released, I think last week, a couple of weeks ago, is a deck building roguelite card game. So, right, we have a lot of different genres here. We have a lot of different team sizes, and all of them use Paper 2D, or they use other tools in Unreal Engine, other plugins that make it possible to make 2D or 2.5D games. So we have a lot of successful examples to look at. And just to reiterate, is it even possible to make 2D games in Unreal Engine? Yes. So you just saw the big list. There's many more of titles that prove it is possible. But also, of course, there's the official sources by Unreal, by Epic Games that show it's possible. And I, for myself, I didn't want to believe the people on the internet that said it's not possible, or that said, well, even if it is possible, it's kind of bad. And just formed my own opinion through trying things out, through trial and error. And in my opinion, I was actually blown away by all the cool things that can be done with it. And you heard me say Paper 2D, Paper 2D, so you might already know what it is, but for those of you who are not familiar with this term, well, Paper 2D is a sprite-based system for creating 2D and 2D/3D hybrid games in Unreal Engine. And it is an official plugin developed by a small team at Epic Games. It comes with Unreal Engine, ships with Unreal Engine, and it is enabled by default. So if you just right-click in the content browser and go to the Paper 2D category, you can start to create these assets. And it consists of sprites, flipbooks, tile sets, and tile maps. So these are the building blocks, the classes that it gives us, which we can then use to make our game. And let's just have a look at all of these for a second. So the paper sprite is at the core of everything. It is the most important one, but it actually is just a texture or a material that is attached to a quad or a plane. And this can then be dragged into the world, like this signpost you see here, the trees. They are simply sprites dragged into the world. But sprites, they can also have collision, they can interact with the character. They can also be used within blueprints. So you have a sprite component that can be, for example, if you have a pickup, a coin that you want to show, it could have a sprite of the coin, it could have a collider in there, and then if the character walks in, you pick it up. Same thing I showed you before with the bullets, right? We have the bullets that use the projectile movement component. So you can just use a sprite within a blueprint to make whatever kind of gameplay functionality you need. And next up, we got a paper flip book. And this is basically a sequence of sprites with some settings that allow us to set how fast should the sequence play out, and how fast should the animation be. And let's look at the, wait, I got the pointer here. Let's look at my dwarf. So this is a character I drew for the RPG, and this is the used item animation. And at the top right, we can set the frames per second. So how fast should the animation play? And you see all of the sprites, the singular sprites that are being used by this flipbook. And we could change the frame run of a single frame. So this is something you often do for like anticipation frames. Before an attack goes out, you want to hold a frame. So you can say, hey, this is running at 15 FPS, but this one frame, this one sprite should run for 2 frames, or it should run for 3 frames to give it more emphasis. And yeah, so I always use that for attacks and things like that to make them feel more weighty, make them feel more heavy. And you can also see here at the bottom, again, back to the RPG. Yeah, again, left side is just Paper 2D, just playing a flipbook. And on the right side, these flipbooks are driven by PaperZD, deciding which animation to play when. And yeah, so you can use them for characters. You can use them for maybe if you have a flower animation, a flower sprite that is animated, you can use them for that. Yeah, just a lot of different ways you can use them. And next up, we got the tile set. And the tile set is very simple. It basically just defines the palette that we want to use when we draw our tile map on the grid. So here we got to specify the size of the tile. So it is a 16 by 16 tile, a pixel art, a 32 by 32. And yeah, of course, it could also be not pixel art. It could be kind of hand-drawn, high-res art. But yeah, we got to specify the size of each tile and then the collision for each tile. Now, you don't have to set collision for the background tiles or foreground tiles, of course, but the ones that you want your characters or objects to interact with. And you can also change the size of the box there. For something like a slope, you can draw the collision by yourself, as you can see here. And yeah, so we just define the size, we define the collision in the tile set. And this tile set is then used inside of this tile map editor. And here we got a grid. We can set the size of the grid, then use this tile set on the left to draw our tiles into it. And here I'm using it for a top-down game, top-down tiles, but of course it also works for side scrollers and that as well. Now these tile maps, they support multiple layers, right? We could have a background layer without collision, a gameplay layer with collision, and maybe also a foreground layer just for decoration and things like that. But there are actually a couple of issues with the tile map editor. I would say it is by far the weakest link of Paper2D because, as you can see here, it actually says beta preview here, and it has been saying that for the last 10 years. So development on Paper2D kind of ended abruptly as the team was moved on to other projects, and they never had the chance to actually finish it and finish their vision for it. So some of the tools are kind of stuck in this perpetual beta state. They work well enough for them to be used, right? But there are many improvements that could be made, right? So the drawing tools are very limited. We got this simple brush. We got the bucket tool to fill things out. There's actually a hidden tool. If you hold Shift, you can copy you can copy your tiles and paste them, which I'm doing here. But yeah, it is very limited. It is also clunky because if you go back with Control and Z, it doesn't delete your last brush stroke. It just deletes the last tile you placed, right? So it gets very clunky. It is a little bit hard to use. There's no advanced features like auto tiling, which are kind of standard nowadays. There is support for isometric. I haven't played around with it too much, but I think it is quite problematic as well. There is one game actually released, I think Arcade Tycoon, that is a isometric 2D game made with Paper2D. So I wonder if they created their own engine tools or if they just use the stock tilemap editor. Okay, so like there are ways to make isometric work, but by default, it is very problematic. But the good thing about Unreal Engine is you can make custom editor tools, and I have seen people make auto tiling systems, right? Auto tiling, make their own tilemap editor, upgrade the old one. And there are also another solution would be to use a third-party tilemap editor. So you don't create the tilemaps directly in Unreal Engine, but you use something like Tiled or LDTK, which is like a different program you open on your PC and you create the tiles there, and you could then export them into any game engine you would like. Now, I think there's also some sort of tiled integration that is already there with Paper2D, but I don't think it works that well. So there are these paid plugins, they cost like 5,000 yen, that you can buy, and you can then kind of create a syncing relationship, updating relationship between Tiled and Unreal Engine. You just click a button and it updates it in Unreal. And yeah, so that way you can avoid these kind of downsides that I just talked about. And one thing that even my viewers probably don't know about, there is something called a paper terrain. And this is very hidden and very experimental. You're not going to find this by just right-clicking in the content browser, in the content drawer, and looking at Paper2D. You need to actually go into the engine and plugins folder to see this actor or create a new blueprint class and then type in paper terrain. So I have not worked with this too much. I actually played around with it yesterday just to prepare for this presentation, but it kept on crashing on me. So yes, it is very experimental. I have actually seen a solution on the Fab Marketplace you could also buy that provides a similar tool. So yeah, this is also one thing that never had the chance to be fully developed, and development just kind of stopped abruptly. But yeah, so let's sum this up a little bit. So what is Paper 2D? So Paper 2D helps us make 2D and 2D 3D hybrids by giving us tools to work with sprites. Is it absolutely necessary? Well, not really, because as we said, Andrew Lilly's other titles, they use Spine, which is another plugin, an SDK, another program that you use if you use bone-based animations. And I don't think they rely on Paper 2D, but I could be wrong. But yeah, anyway, so there's many different ways. Some people even just make their own custom material and then drive the animation manually. But of course, like you need to be quite advanced to do something like this. And Paper 2D just gives us these things out of the box. And it just makes it easy for everybody to get started, have the sprites, have the flipbooks, have the tile maps, have the tile sets, right? And if you are an advanced user, you could actually change the source code and make changes to that or use other tools as well. And outside of the tile map, I just quickly want to touch upon a couple of other issues, or they could be issues depending on what kind of game you want to make. And one is that we don't have a dedicated 2D physics mode. What you can see here is it is just 3D physics, but I put a constraint on the axis for rotation and transformation, so they cannot go into the background, they cannot come into the foreground. Um, and this works just fine for most type of games that you would want to make. But if you want to make a game that is heavily relying on physics, where physics is your main gimmick, you might have a couple of issues with Unreal Engine because we don't have the dedicated 2D physics that would be more accurate, that would be more performant, right? But there is actually a 2D physics engine called Box 2D, which is open source, and it is also the one that Unity uses. And it was actually implemented in Unreal Engine in an experimental state, though, at some point. And according to Michael Noland, who was the lead developer on Paper 2D at the time, it was actually removed around Unreal Engine 4.18. So this means the most complete version of Box 2D in Unreal should be at 4.17. So you could try that out and play around with it. Now, is this really an issue? Well, it depends on what kind of game you want to make. If you just make a platformer, strategy game, whatever, like something that doesn't heavily rely on physics, it should be fine because on the characters, on projectiles, and even on falling objects like this, we can just put in a constraint. But if the physics is the main selling point of your game, you're probably better off elsewhere. Another issue is that there is no animation graph support with Paper 2D. Now, if you've worked with a skeletal mesh, an animation blueprint in Unreal Engine before, well, you probably know that this is what an animation graph looks like. And we can transition from the jump animation to falling loop, for example, idle walking. And we have these conditions, transitional conditions. And they say, hey, if the velocity is higher than this and this, then go from idle to walking, for example. If the velocity is 0, go back to idle. If we are airborne, go to the jump animation and things like this. And this creates a nice separation of concerns because we know the animation blueprint cares about animations, the blueprint, the character blueprint cares about gameplay implementation. So it allows us to reason about like a single module at the time. And sadly, we do not have that with Paper 2D because we have to directly call the set flipbook function on the sprite and tell it at what point in time it should play which animation. And typically you would make an event or a function called update animation and call it on tick. And here we can then check, are we grounded? Then do this. Are we airborne? Do this. And then we can decide between the idle and walking animation or between the rising and falling animation and do it like this. Now, this is fine if you only have a couple of animation states that you need to switch between, right? It is good enough. But as your character becomes more complicated, as you have more attacks, maybe more different animations, it starts to become kind of bloated and hard to handle. And a similar issue is that there's no anim notify support. Again, with skeletal meshes, even if you're just using an animation, if you're using an animation montage, in both cases, we can set on each frame and notify that we want to fire off. So for example, we could say if on frame 5, for example, the foot touches the ground, okay, I want to play a sound, a footstep sound. I want to play a Niagara particle effect of dust clouding up around the foot. And yeah, so it just allows us to, again, separate this from the gameplay logic. We just play a sound, we play a particle effect. But most importantly, we can also trigger custom events. So if you want to make a hitbox active on this frame and stop on that frame, we can create a custom notify. If you want to fire a bullet on frame 15, we can do this here. In Paper 2D with the default way of doing it, it is not very elegant. We have to check on tick. Is the current animation we're playing the one we're looking for? In this case, the attack animation. And I want to trigger the check hit on frame 3 of the attack. But then again, depending on the frame rate, the frame 3 might be shown for multiple frames. So I have to use a do once and reset it if that's not the case, and then call the check hit. And again, this works fine if you have a couple of events that you want to trigger, but it gets quite bloated if you have a beat 'em up, if you have a Metroidvania, if you have multiple attack types, multiple things you want to do, right? So it works. It has the bare minimum, but it is not very scalable. And listening to these couple of issues we had now, you might wonder, so why even make 2D and 2.5D games with Unreal if we have these problems? And that is also a question I often got asked in the beginning on my videos. But depending on who you are, what your background is, there's actually a lot of reasons why you might want to use it. Let's get into it. So prior experience and future plans are, of course, a big thing. And I'm just going to play this video because it looks cool. It's not really related. But yeah, so for me, it just started out with curiosity. I just wanted to try it, see if it works, how it works. And yeah, I wanted to make a beat 'em up, but I didn't want to go back to Unity after spending so much time on learning Unreal, on getting used to it. And it really clicked with me in ways that other engines didn't click with me. So yeah, I just played around with Paper 2D, noticed the potential, and found out that there's so many cool things that can be done. And I'm mostly a programmer, so for me, just having Unreal Engine looks good by default. I don't have to change too many settings. It looks good for these 2D, 3D hybrids, right? So for me, it is kind of the perfect way of going about it. And many other teams that I talked to or that I read about in interviews had a similar story, right? Like Imp of the Sun, for example, they wanted to make different games with Unreal Engine eventually. So this was kind of easier for them to start with a 2D game than making a full 3D game. Replic Survivors, for example, they had a lot of members on the team that worked with Unreal Engine in their day job. So for them, they could just make the game 10 times faster using Unreal than having to pick up another engine and spending months, if not years, getting used to it. And of course, you could learn multiple game engines. I've probably touched 10 different game engines or frameworks throughout my life at this point. But what you probably can't do is master all of them and stay up to date with the updates and everything. And I mean, Unreal Engine is my job, and still there are so many new features, so many updates. It's really hard to, yeah, just stay on top of it. I have my watch later list on YouTube is exploding with these Unreal Fest talks that I want to watch. But yeah, it's just so much going on, and yeah, making games is hard enough. If you want to like learn multiple game engines at the same time, it just makes it harder. Of course, it's cool as an exercise to kind of broaden your horizon, but like actually shipping things, getting things done, probably just stick with one. And yeah, if Unreal just clicks with you, if you like working with it, that might be more important than using the theoretically best engine because the game will be better in the end. And yeah, so the biggest reason I would say why we want to make 2D games and 2.5D games in Unreal is everything outside of the 2D toolset, right? Because the 2D toolset is good, it's good enough, but yeah, there are a couple of issues. But what is better is that, well, everything that makes Unreal Engine great as a game engine in general also makes it great for our 2D and 2.5D games. Now, some of these things might not seem important at first, but if you actually want to finish a game, well, localization is built into Unreal. You don't have to make a custom system. All of your games will need localization in some way, shape, or form. And yeah, you don't have to pay hundreds of dollars for some marketplace assets. Multi-platform support is relatively easy. It's built in as well. And yeah, I've seen many of my students just make mobile versions of their games rather quickly. Well, we do have the sequencer for making cutscenes. The sequencer also works with Paper 2D, it works with PaperZD. And yeah, if you make an RPG, for example, you will need to make a lot of cutscenes, and the sequencer is quite advanced. It got a lot of updates recently, it's still getting updated. So yeah, it is just a great tool to use. And this one I think is the biggest for indie devs, hobby developers, small teams. Blueprint visual scripting, right? Many people just don't know how to code with C Sharp, C++. They mainly want to focus on game design, mainly want to focus on art. And Blueprint visual scripting, while it still requires programming knowledge, while it still requires you to figure things out logically, it just kind of lowers the bar because, yeah, some people are just scared of writing code. And even for me as a programmer, even though, yeah, I did not like blueprints at first, they felt very weird. But yeah, after I got used to them, I realized how fast it allows you to make games. And yeah, so you just have this quick iteration speed. They compile instantly almost, and you can just, yeah, write something in your blueprints, click on play, test it out right away. And yeah, you can test out your game design, test out your level design so quickly that you just get in many more loops of iteration, which then make your game better in the end because you can polish it up way quicker. And yeah, so fast iteration, but also fast iteration in terms of materials, the way material instances work and everything. What you see is what you get is the kind of catchphrase you often hear. And yeah, so that also just makes it a lot more comfortable, a lot faster to work with. And yeah, there's many more things that I could mention, but yeah, so driving 2D sprites is only a small part of making your game in the end, and having all of these other features might more than make up for the 2D toolset not being that amazing. And next up, I want to talk about something I really care about, which is the 2D community. So we have many success stories, as you've seen with the game list I shared. Many games that you've played, that millions of players have played, were actually made with Unreal Engine. But also outside of commercial games, I have many students message me, and yeah, they watch my videos. They started doing Paper 2D. They really liked it, and yeah, they created some nice projects that got them a good grade or got them a job. And yeah, Felt Chasers is one of those. It was a student project, a group project. And yeah, they liked it so much, they put it out on Steam. They got some good feedback there, and it helped a lot of them get jobs. And also, just in general, I often get messages from people that found Unreal Engine quite intimidating to get into because, well, with most game engines, you kind of start with 2D. Making 2D games is generally the easier way to go about it. You have to worry about one less axis. Um, and yeah, so like having Paper 2D allows people to just come into Unreal at first, just worry about 2D, just worry about two axes, get used to it, get used to the tool set, and then they can take the next step to go into 3D development or 2.5D development. And yeah, so it just creates a nicer learning path, I think. And also, we now have a lot of plugin creators. So the kind of downsides that we have with the current state of Paper 2D, well, they are working on making it better. For example, we have sprite importers now, so you don't have to manually cut the sprite sheets anymore. You don't have to use the JSON import method, which actually is kind of good. But yeah, sprite method is even better if, well, you use sprite or any program that supports .asprite or .ace files. And yeah, it just makes it just that little bit faster, just that little bit more comfortable. We got these tiled integration tools now. We have asset packs, we have sample projects that are 2D or 2.5D, right? So we have a lot of creators now also being on board. And I'm also not the only person making tutorials about Paper 2D anymore. And actually, there were people before me, but nobody that really doubled down on it and yeah, just really made it their main focus. But yeah, we now have a lot of other people also covering this from time to time. And yeah, Epic Games is also supporting our community, sadly, not by updating Paper 2D. I hope we get to that at some point in the future, but they do support us by giving us opportunities like this right now, where I can talk to you and yeah, show you what we are working on, what the community is working on, and hopefully get you to try it out as well. And I also had a chance to submit a video to Ari's amazing presentation last year, myth busting Unreal Engine best practices. I think it was last year, maybe this year. But yeah, just having these chances to show off the stuff that we're working on, getting more people into the community. And yeah, so one of those things, I was able to make a free tutorial series, a course for the ArtStation Learning platform. They had Chris Wilson from the Siege and the Sandbox make a tutorial, a 2D tutorial for the Unreal Dev community. And very recently, they had Tiago Carnero make a 2.5D course for the official Unreal Engine YouTube channel, right? So there's a lot of things happening right now. We're getting new plugins, we're getting more people making tutorials, we're getting more people making games. And yeah, I'm just very happy about that. And I'm looking forward to the next couple of years, what kind of cool things we are about to see. And one thing I just want to cover very briefly is that being in the Epic Games ecosystem has a lot of benefits as well. And yeah, so we got great licensing terms. If you make a game, as long as it makes less than $1 million per title, as long as you make less than 1 million per title, you don't have to pay anything, not a single cent. And only the exceeding amount you have to pay 5% royalty on. And I don't want to point fingers in any particular direction, right? But not too long ago, another game engine that many people considered the go-to for 2D games had a big blunder about licensing, and they lost the trust of many people. And that is the time where I got the biggest spike in new viewers, the biggest spike in offers for me to create courses and other material for people, and also, yeah, just the biggest spike in people joining our community. So just a licensing term where a reason for many other people to come over to Unreal, and then also use it for 2.5D and 2D games. Also like Epic Mega Grants, you probably know about. So you have a better chance of getting picked by making something unique that maybe showcases a certain feature of Unreal, a certain way that Unreal can be used. And since paper 2D games, even though there are a couple of examples, it is still not a common thing. So you have a higher chance of being picked by being unique. And in the beginning, the first couple of years, pretty much every paper 2D project got a grant. And of course, it's gotten harder because more people know about it. There's more competition now. But I still think if you make a decent 2D, 2.5D game, you have a good chance of being picked for a mega grant. And yeah, there's just Epic Game Store benefits if you also release on that store alongside other stores with an Unreal Engine game. And there's a couple of other things that I just want to address quickly because some people are very concerned about the performance with Unreal Engine for 2D games because, of course, it is overkill in a way. I do agree with that. But, well, in the end, what is your target platform? What is your FPS? That is what matters. And with Unreal Engine 5.4, I believe, I hit 165 FPS on the Steam Deck, which is quite aging hardware at this point. And that is with Lumen on. It is activated, but it is not actually like doing anything with virtual shadow maps, with deferred rendering. So just the default settings on. I think I just turned off TSR for anti-aliasing. But yeah, so then even just doing a couple of tweaks, just a couple of minutes, project settings, post-process settings, I was able to get 380 FPS on the Steam Deck. Then another tweak to force an unlit view mode can be done through C++. That gave another 30 FPS rise, so 410 FPS. And that is just the simplest stuff. Like you could change the mobile renderer. There's so many more things you could do to squeeze even more performance out of it. But yeah, in the end, like we care about 60 FPS, log to 60 for these type of 2D games. The benefits you get from more than that are quite negligible because the animations are drawn at a certain frame rate anyway. So you get better interpolation, you get maybe more responsiveness in terms of controls. But still, right, like we would probably play at a locked 60. There is no problem. We have so much overhead here. Yeah, the only time you might have problems is the OG switch. But let's look at the next one because there's also package size concerns. And I did a couple of tests with Unreal Engine 5.4. And with default settings, a shipping build is around 320 megabytes, which is quite large for a 2D game. But if you make a small 2D game, and there are ways to lower this quite easily, so we can just disable the prerequisites, which install the Visual C++ redistributables. If you put a game out on Steam, they are going to be ignored anyway because there's a different way of installing them. But yeah, also disable the Open Image Denoise plugin, which we don't need. It's just needed for path tracing. I don't understand why this is on by default. But actually, in recent versions, it is not on anymore. We got these other denoising plugins, which are also again 50 megabytes that we don't use, that almost nobody uses. Yeah, just make sure to turn them off and you can save 100 megabytes. And there's also other plugins you can turn off. You can adjust the pack files. Now, these things are more advanced. They are a little bit more risky. You could break things if you are not careful. But anyway, so I was able to get the game down to 150 megabytes, which is still quite large, but it is not like catastrophic. It is not too problematic for anything other than a game jam because, well, you're going to have textures, you're going to have sound files, you might have videos, and those are going to be bigger in the end. So having this extra load from the engine shaders is not too big of an issue. Of course, it's not ideal, but it is not a huge issue. And the last reason for using Unreal Engine for 2D games is that PaperZD is awesome. And again, you heard me mention it before. So now we're gonna kind of go into what it does and why it is so helpful. So what is PaperZD? It is a free plugin that works together with Paper 2D. It doesn't replace Paper 2D. It kind of works hand in hand, or let's say on top of Paper 2D. And it solves the two biggest issues we talked about before, that there is no animation graph support and there are no anim notifies with Paper 2D. And yeah, so it released in 2017. It first was a paid plugin that was well worth the money, I might say, because I used it back then too. And it received an Epic Mega Grant in 2022 and became free. And it being free is huge because this means that content creators, YouTubers, course creators can now use PaperZD in their tutorials, because every student, every viewer can just download it and follow along, because you cannot expect a viewer to pay money to follow along with the tutorial, right? So this is what allowed PaperZD to really spread, to really get people into it. And I think my first PaperZD tutorial is still my most popular video nowadays with over 800,000 views. So there's a lot of people that at least want to give it a try, or that are interested in making 2D or 2.5D games with Unreal Engine. And let's now look at this in detail. The animation graph. This is the PaperZD animation graph. It looks very similar to the one that Skeletal Meshes have. And yeah, so we can just define the different states, the different animation states, and then the transitions. When are we allowed to go from one state to another based on velocity, based on some Boolean flag or enum flag that we set? And yeah, so there's also enums we can use inside. There's a Boolean selector we can use, for example, to show either the idle animation or the idle animation with the gun drawn, the jump animation or the jump animation with the gun drawn. And then, of course, the slide, the wall slide, all of these other animations, we just set them up in here. And yeah, that allows for a nice separation of concerns pattern. We only worry about the animations in the animation graph. And yeah, so this allows us to go from our kind of primitive way of just directly calling everything in the blueprint to having this nice animation graph, just making it a little bit nicer and easier to handle. Actually, a lot nicer and easier to handle. And hand in hand with that, we can use animation overrides. So they got added to PaperZD a little bit later, but they pretty much mimic what an animation montage does for skeletal meshes. And we can just call it in the blueprint whenever we want to play a specific animation. Just ignore everything that is happening in the animation graph and just override it and say, hey, I want to play an attack animation right now. And I can just play it instantly. I get these nice pins from the onCompleted and the onCancelled event, which I can then use to set some flags. Or in the case of this, I know that the turn of the character is over, and after a delay, I just make it walk back to the starting position. And yeah, so these just allow us to handle timing very easily. And they're perfect for these kind of one-off animations, especially attacks and things like that. And another way of handling animations are animation jumps. So they're similar to the overrides in the way that we just call them in the blueprint whenever we want to use them, but they actually allow us to change the position we are at in the animation graph. So they don't override the animation graph, they just allow us to jump to a specific point. And this makes them a great solution for looping animations, because overrides are mostly used for kind of one-offs where we just want to have the start and the end event. But if the player gets defeated, as you can see here, they should keep on playing the defeated animation, and a jump just lets us just jump straight to the animation. We don't have to make a transition from every possible state to the defeated state. Next up, we then have the anim notifies, and the window you can see here is the animation source. And the animation source is the first file we set up for every character, for every object that we want to animate with PaperZD. And we have to register every animation we want to use and every flipbook that it connects to. And yeah, then we can just pick an animation, and at the bottom here, we can add these anim notifies just the same way as we would with a 3D character. So I can play sound effects here. I can play these Niagara particle effects. It also supports Cascade, the old particle effect, the deprecated one. But also, yeah, we can just have our custom events here. So I can say at this specific frame, I want the attack to hit the target, or I could have a hitbox, I could spawn a bullet, right? And this, again, it is great separation of concerns. It allows us to do things in with very precise timings. And again, so this allows us to go from this very manual method that is not very scalable to just having this nice animation notify, having these notifies here on the animation sequence. Yes. And the other feature, another feature that I want to talk about, are directional animations with PaperZD. Again, this is set up in the animation source, and we can, for example, have a character like this with 4 different directions. So up, down, left, right. but it also supports 8 directions. So we have the diagonals here as well. And we can play the walk animation, the attack animation, everything is connected here. And yeah, so it even supports up to 16 directions, which is not quite common, but some games that go above and beyond do have 16 animations. It can also change the angle of the animation, so we can have an isometric game at a 45-degree angle. And yeah, this just makes it a lot easier to set up. Of course, we could make a system by ourselves in Blueprints that switches the animations depending on the rotation of the character and things like that. But it is not very scalable. It is not very easy to update. So this just, again, makes it so much easier to just get into it, have it set up, update it, and things like that. And this actually works together with the sequencer. So in the sequencer for cutscenes or other events, we can use Paper 2D. It works also with it, but we can also use PaperZD, and the directionality also works in the sequencer, right? So here in the rotation, I just changed the rotation of the character, and you can see the sprite also changes. Is it the right facing direction, the down facing direction, which one is played based on this rotation? It just makes it very convenient to make cutscenes. So does PaperZD solve all of our issues? Well, when it comes to 2D 3D hybrids or 2.5D games, it does actually solve all of our issues, because our issues were just that we didn't have an animation graph and we didn't have anim notifies. Right, so for these 2D 3D hybrids, 2.5D games, I believe Unreal Engine is one of the best, if not the best solution. Of course, you can create something similar with other engines, but I found that it's just easier to achieve this nice look with Unreal's lighting and shading and post-processing. But of course, that is my opinion. Somebody might disagree, but yeah, a lot of my students were able to also achieve great looking games with this. And yeah, so for 2D only games, it helps again with the animations, the animation graph, the anim notifies, we can also use them. But PaperZD doesn't really try to do anything about the tile map issues that we talked about. So if you want to use tile maps, of course, there's other approaches to making stages for these flat 2D games as well. But if you want to use tile maps, you will probably have to keep it very simple, or get a plugin from the marketplace, or create your own custom tool if tile maps are very important for your game. And now I just want to go into a hands-on demonstration just to go through a couple of like workflow things with Paper 2D, PaperZD, and just show you a couple of useful techniques as well. The first thing I want to show you is that we can actually create custom 2D templates for Unreal Engine. And I'm pretty sure you don't have these 4 templates that I have here in your Unreal Engine version. And why is this important? Because for 2D and 2.5D games, we have to change a lot of the project settings, post-process settings, and doing that every single time you want to just try something out, make a new project, is very cumbersome, and this just saves us 30 minutes or 15 minutes every single time. Creating a template is also very easy. You simply have to drag a project that you created before that has everything you want, the settings you want, the blueprints you want, into the templates folder of your Unreal Engine version. And in here, you have to then go into config and create this template devs file. And you can simply go to any of the other templates, copy paste it, and then just change the name, change what is special about your project. And then it is going to show up in the template view when you make a new Unreal Engine project. Another cool thing that we are able to do is get out of this perspective view, because it makes it a little bit hard to work with these 2D stages. We can click on here, and for a side scroller, you want to go to the right view, and for a top-down game to the top view. And then I want to change from wireframe to either lit or unlit. And you can see with right click, I can hold right click and drag around. And this is a 2D view. It makes it look as if it was a 2D game using the orthographic camera. And this just makes it a lot easier to make adjustments to your level like this and work on your level design. Now, sadly, this actually broke with Unreal Engine 5.5 and onward, I think, probably because some of the settings changed on the orthographic camera. So it works all the way up to 5.4. I hope we might get a fix in 5.7, 5.8, but we'll have to see. Another setting that I talked about before is the constraint to plane setting. And what can happen if we don't have this on is that even if I can just walk left and right, if there maybe is an object, physics can push me into the foreground and it breaks the entire stage, it breaks the entire game. To prevent this, there's an easy setting on the character movement component. So this is my character, here's the character movement component, and I can simply look for constraint and turn on constraint to plane. And in this case, I want to use the y-axis. And now if I go back to the game and restart, no matter what happens, I cannot be pushed into the foreground, I cannot be pushed into the background. Even if I use the launch character node, something like this, right? So it always prevents me from going in the background, in the foreground, so we always stay on our gameplay lane. And the same setting is also available for physics objects, and it is also available for the projectile movement component. And lastly, I want to show you a couple of things in this 2D 3D hybrid project. First of all, a couple of different ways we can import sprites. What I'm using here is Asprite, which is probably the most popular pixel art software for PC, and I got my top-down character here. Now I'm going to export the sprite sheet, and I changed a couple of settings here, so we get the JSON, we get the PNG, and we can split by tags, so I have the different directions here, and I can then export it. Now the standard way is to just get the PNG file, so I'm going to drag the PNG file in here, and it's going to import it, and I get this texture right here. And you can see it's all kinds of blurry. And the easiest way to fix this is to just right-click, Sprite Actions, apply Paper 2D texture settings, and now we have the nearest filter active. To get the individual sprites, we then have to right-click, Sprite Actions, and go to Extract Sprites. And usually auto extract mode doesn't work all that well, so we go to Grid, and we then have to specify the cell width and height. And for the width, we can just take this number and divide it by how many cells we have. So divide it by 6. And then here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, divided by 8. Like this. And yeah, this gives us these sprites now. But you see, we also get these empty sprites. We have to then delete them, go like this, and then create our flipbooks manually. So for the down idle, for example, I need these two. I can right-click, create flipbook, and you can see we now have the animation. And we would have to do this for the other ones as well. And it works, it's a decent workflow, but there's a lot of better ways of doing it. The next best way is to use JSON. So we also created a JSON Asprite. I can just drag that in right now, like this, and I can right-click it and create flipbooks. And now we skipped all of these steps. We still have the frames in here. It already applied the texture settings, and now I just have the flipbook here for all of my directions. And this is the workflow I'm mainly using. That is pretty nice. But there's an even better way I've been experimenting with recently, and this relies on a paid plugin from the marketplace. And it's here, Asprite Importer by ENFP Dev Studios. And that way, I can just drag the Asprite file in here directly. And I'm going to drag it in. And it's going to ask me a couple of different settings. Do I want to create the flipbooks? Yes. FPS. And I work with a pixel per unit of 0.25. And I want to have the pivot at the bottom center. And this way, I can also import it like this. We still get the frames the same way. We get the flipbooks the same way. And yeah, but it actually allows us to set the frames per second. It allows us to already set the pivot at the bottom, and it just saves us a couple of steps. But most importantly, if I now make changes to the character, let's just draw on the face and save. Back in Unreal Engine, I just have to right-click here and re-import. And now on the flipbooks, you can see the changes are applied here. But currently there's sadly a bug with this plugin that it resets the pixel per unit setting back to 1.0, and the pivot mode gets all kinds of messed up. So I actually talked to the developer, and I think this is hopefully going to be fixed soon, but then this is by far the best way of working with pixel art in Unreal Engine, because we can just instantly make changes and apply that to our project. And just as the last thing, I want to show you if we grab one of these flipbooks, let's take the JSON approach. I can drag it into the world, but you see by default it looks quite different than the others. It doesn't cast a shadow. It doesn't receive shadows either. If I drag the dwarf here, right, it just ignores the shadows. And we can just go to the outliner. Let me press F10. And yeah, so I pick the character, and on the flipbook, I can simply look for cast shadow. I can turn it on, and you can see we now cast nice shadows. And then I can go to the material. Here we have the masked unlit sprite material as the default. I just have to change this to the masked lit sprite material. And now you see we get the color of the sun affecting the character, and we also get the shadow of the dwarf. Yeah, and this is just the simple settings that allow us to make these nice looking 2D 3D hybrids. And that's pretty much it for this presentation. Thank you for listening. これで発表を終わりにします。もし UE2D に興味が湧きましたら試してみてください。ご清聴ありがとうございました。
コブラコード様、ありがとうございました。